The auctioneer said my father's name, and then he said the number, and the number was bigger than my whole life. I stood on the block in the dress they had given me, which was clean. That was the cruelty of it. They washed me and combed me and put me in good gray wool so the court could see the goods properly. And then they read out what my father owed the crown, and 400 people turned to look at me at the same time. Someone near the back laughed. Then a voice from the dais said, "I'll take the debt." The hall went quiet so fast I heard the fire. The Alpha King did not stand up to say it. He said it the way a man orders more wine. "She cost me nothing." The whole court heard him. My father was a grain factor for the Northern Road. That is a small and boring thing to be, and it is the reason I knew how to read a ledger before I knew how to dance. And it is also the reason I was standing on a block in the Hall of Accounts with my hair pinned up by a stranger. He died in the spring. He died owing the crown 1,100 silver marks against 3 barges that went into the river with the winter grain still in them. And the crown does not care whether a man drowned trying to save his own cargo. The crown cares that the ledger has a hole in it. When a man dies with a hole in the ledger, the hole is inherited. That is the law in the North, and it has been the law for 200 years, and nobody in that hall thought it was strange except me. And I had stopped saying so out loud a week earlier, when saying so out loud got me put in a cell under the counting house for a night to think about my manners. So, the block. They hold the debt auction in the Hall of Accounts on the first clear day after the thaw, because the roads open and the nobles come in from their winter holdings and they are bored, and a debt auction is free entertainment before the feast. I want to be precise about this, because I have heard people describe it since as a solemn legal proceeding. It is not. It is a show. There were nobles eating off little plates. There was a boy going up and down the rows with a jug. Lady Serene of the Westwater was there in white fur with her hands folded, and she watched me the way you watch a horse you are not going to buy. The auctioneer read the sum. 1,100 marks. He read the term attached to it, which is the part everyone forgets, and which turned out to matter more than anything else in my life. The debt could be assumed by any lord of the North, and if it was assumed, the debtor served the assuming house for 1 year from the day of the assumption. 1 year. At the end of the year, the debt was called satisfied, and she walked, or the house declared her insufficient, and she stayed. Forever. In the ledger, she stops being a person at that point and becomes a line item, and there is no third option, and nobody in the North has ever explained to me why the number is 1 year and not 2 or 10. It just is. It is written on the paper. 400 faces. I remember thinking, quite calmly, that if I fainted, they would all get a better story out of the day than they had paid for. So I would not faint. I set my feet. I looked at the beam in the ceiling above the dais, and I counted the pegs in it. There are 9 pegs in that beam. I have counted them many times since. Then the laugh from the back. And then the voice. I want to tell you that I looked at him when he said it. I did not. I kept looking at the beam because I did not understand yet what had happened, and because the voice had come from the high seat, and the high seat belonged to Varek, Alpha King of the North, who did not come to debt auctions. Kings do not buy grain factors' daughters. Kings send a steward with a purse if they want something from a room like that, and the steward haggles, and the king never has to be in the building. He was in the building. "I'll take the debt," he said again, because the auctioneer had made a small strangled noise instead of answering, and then, into the silence, without any particular emphasis, the way you would say the sky is gray. "She cost me nothing." That is when I looked. He was sitting forward with one arm over his knee. Dark hair pushed back, 3 days of not shaving, a plain black coat with no chain of office on it, which I later learned he wore precisely so that everyone in the room would spend the whole hour wondering whether he was going to speak. He did not look cruel. That was the first thing I noticed, and the thing that made no sense with the words. He looked bored, and under the boredom he looked tired in a way I recognized, because I had been sleeping 4 hours a night since spring, and you learned the face. The court laughed. Not all of them. Enough. It went through the hall in a wave the way laughter does when people are relieved that someone else has been chosen, and I heard it come toward me from the left and pass over me and go out the right side, and I stood in it, and I did not move my face at all. Lady Serene laughed too. She did it beautifully, with 2 fingers at her mouth. 1,100 marks. He said I cost him nothing, and then he paid 1,100 marks in front of 400 witnesses, and not one of those 400 people found that strange, because when a king says a thing is worthless, the thing is worthless, and the money is just money. The clerk brought the contract up to the dais on a wooden tray. 2 copies as the law requires, 1 for the house and 1 for the crown. I watched him sign because there was nothing else to watch. He did not read it. He signed it the way you sign something you have already decided about a week ago. And then he did the thing. He picked up the crown's copy and folded it. Not casually. In half, and in half again, pressing the crease each time with his thumb, all 4 corners squared, the way my father folded a bill of lading before he put it away. And then he opened the front of his coat and put it inside against his chest, left side, and closed the coat over it. I know exactly how ridiculous it is that this is the moment I remember. A man folded a piece of paper, but I had watched my father do that same fold 400 times over a counting table. Always the same, always 4 corners, always the left side of the coat. And there is a specific way a person handles a document when the document is not a formality to them. He did not hand it to the clerk. The clerk was standing right there with the tray out and his hand ready, and the King of the North folded the paper into quarters and put it in his coat like a letter from home. Nobody else in the hall noticed. They were still laughing about the other thing. They walked me out through the side door and across the yard to the wagons, and the cold came up off the stones through my shoes, and behind me I could hear the hall going back to its noise. A guard put a blanket around my shoulders, not kindly, the way you cover cargo. Bess was in the second wagon, a kitchen woman with red hands who had been bought off the East Road debt 2 years before and had 4 months of her year left. She looked at me, and then looked at the castle up on the rock, and she said, "You'll want to learn the bell." "The bell?" "The bell tells you where to be. You're late twice. You get the yard. You get the yard in front of everyone, and after that, they all know your face." She shrugged and pulled her own blanket up. Learn the bell. That was my introduction to the Ashfell. Not the towers, not the great hall, not the king. A woman with cracked knuckles telling me that in this place the punishment is that everybody watches. I did not cry in the wagon. I want to be clear that this is not because I am strong. I did not cry because I was doing arithmetic. 1,100 marks over 1 year is 3 marks a day, and a kitchen woman in the north earns 2 coppers a day, and there are 60 coppers to a mark. And so I sat in a wagon in the cold and worked out that I could not have earned that money in 90 lifetimes, which meant the year was not about the money at all, which meant I did not understand what the year was about. I have always done this. When something is too big to feel, I take it apart and count it. My father was the same. It is not a virtue. It is a way of not being in the room. The Ashfell sits on a black rock over the river, and it is not beautiful. It is a working fortress with a court bolted onto the side of it, and the wind comes down the gorge and finds every gap, and the whole place smells of wood smoke and cold stone and, faintly everywhere, of wet dog, which nobody there would ever say out loud, and which I thought was very funny for about 2 days. They gave me a gray dress, a straw mattress in the underhall with 11 other women, and a place in the service rotation. Not the kitchen. The hall. Which Bess told me later was deliberate, and which I did not believe at the time. Serving in the hall means you are visible. You carry, you pour, you stand at the wall between courses with your hands folded and your eyes down while 300 people eat, and every single person in that room knows what you are, because they were there in the Hall of Accounts, or because somebody who was there told them over the second course. The girl who cost the king nothing. That is what I was called for the first month. not to my face at first. Then to my face. I learned the bell. I learned that the third bell is the one that matters, and the fourth is already too late. I learned to carry a full jug up the north stair without spilling, and which flagstone in the passage outside the buttery rocks, and that Lord Aldrich, the steward, watched the wine level in the king's cup and not the king, and that if the king's cup went dry on your rotation, you would hear about it in the yard. And I learned the shape of the year. There is a slate in the steward's room with the bound names on it and the days remaining, chalked and rubbed out and chalked again every morning, and mine went up on the first day with 365 beside it. Bess had 118. There was a man called Owing with 9. 365. Then 364. I went and looked at it every morning before the first bell. Everyone did. That is the point of the slate. In 4 weeks, I saw the king 11 times, and he did not look at me once. He came to the hall, he ate very little, he listened to men who wanted things, and twice he stood up in the middle of a course and left, and the whole room had to pretend that was normal. I served at his end of the table 4 of those times. I put a jug down, and I took a jug away, and I stood at the wall, and I might as well have been the wall. I told myself I was glad. I told myself the alternative was worse. And every night I lay on the straw, and I thought about a man in a black coat, folding a piece of paper into 4 squares, and putting it against his chest, and I thought, that is not how you handle something that cost you nothing. It happened on the 31st day, on the north stair, because of a dog. There are dogs everywhere in the Ashfell, real ones, the enormous gray kind that lie across doorways and refuse to understand that they are in the way. One of them was on the 4th step from the top, asleep, and I was coming up with a full jug in both hands and my eyes down because that is how you are taught to walk, and I did not see it until my shin was already against its ribs. I went sideways. The jug went with me. I had exactly enough time to think about the wine going down the stairs and the yard and everybody watching, and then a hand closed around my upper arm and stopped all of it. He had come up behind me. I had not heard him. Nobody in that castle ever heard him, which I would later find out was not a talent, but a habit, and the habit had a reason. He held me until I had my feet, which took perhaps 2 heartbeats, and he took the jug off me with his other hand, as if it weighed nothing, and he set it on the step above the dog. Then he let go of my arm and stepped back, and the stepping back was fast, faster than the catching. He put a full arm's length between us, and he put his hand behind his back, and he did it so quickly that I felt the space open like a draft. "The stair is bad," he said. "That is not your fault." Then he went down past me and past the dog, and the dog did not wake up, and that was the whole thing. 11 words. Perhaps 4 seconds. I stood on the north stair holding nothing. Here is what I want to be honest about. He was warm. That is a stupid thing to notice, and it is the thing I noticed. Through the wool of my sleeve, in a stairwell where I could see my own breath, his hand was warm the way a stone is warm when it has been in the sun. And I had been cold for 31 days, and my body registered that fact before any other part of me got a vote. Do not think about his hands. Do not think about his hands. I thought about his hands for the rest of the stair, and up the passage, and through the service door, and while I was putting the jug down at the far end of the high table. And by then, I had also thought about the fact that a man who catches someone by the arm does not need to catch them by the upper arm, and that there had been no reason for it to be gentle, and it had been gentle. I set the jug down harder than I meant to, and Lord Aldrich looked at me from the end of the table with an expression that said he had made a note. The thing about that stair is that it broke something. For 31 days, he had been a shape at the top of a room, a voice that said no to men in good coats, an outline I served around. After the stair, he was a person with a temperature, and I could not get that back in the box. I started noticing things. I would like to say I did not, But the whole point of writing this down is that I have decided to stop being polite about it. I noticed that he ate almost nothing at the long feasts, and that the plates went back full and that nobody ever remarked on it. I noticed that when the hall got loud, he pressed the heel of his hand against his temple for about a second, and then stopped. And that after he did that, he would leave within a quarter hour. I noticed that he never let anybody serve him from behind, and that if you came at his right shoulder, he would turn his head slightly before you were there, and that this was not suspicion, it was reflex, and something had put it in him. I noticed that in a hall of 300 people who all wanted a piece of him, he touched no one. Not a hand on a shoulder, not a clasp, not the ordinary contact that men of that kind hand out all day like coins. Nothing. He kept a space around himself the size of a table, and the court arranged itself around the edge of it without ever discussing it. He had put his hand on my arm on the north stair, and then he had stepped back as if the stair had bitten him. The second thing happened 4 days later, and it was worse, because the second time there was no dog and no reason. They put me on the small solar for the evening, which is the room where he takes the last hour with the maps when the hall is done, and which is a much worse duty than the Great Hall, because in the Great Hall, you are one of 9, and in the solar, you are the only one. Aldrich put me there. I understood by then that Aldrich put me wherever would be most uncomfortable, because Aldrich had decided in the first week that I did not know my place, and Aldrich was correct. So, the solar, a fire, 4 men around a table with the northern road drawn on it in charcoal, and me at the wall with a jug. They were arguing about the Westwater Alliance. I was not listening on purpose. I was listening the way you listen when you are a piece of furniture, and the furniture happens to have spent 19 years next to a grain factor's counting table. Which is to say, I heard a man say that the Westwater grain would come up the river in the spring at 4 marks. The barge. And I thought, no, it will not. Because the Westwater barges draw too much for the upper river before the second thaw. Everybody on the northern road knows that. My father knew that. My father lost 3 barges finding out the hard way what the river does in a bad spring. I did not say anything. I want that on the record. I stood at the wall with the jug and I said nothing, and I kept my eyes on the floor, and I only made a sound because I breathed out through my nose. Every man at that table went on talking. He looked up. He looked straight at me, across a room, past 4 lords, because I had breathed. And he said, "Say it." Nobody spoke. Aldrich's head came round like a bird's. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, "she is bound service." "I know what she is." He had not stopped looking at me. Say it. And I found out something about myself in that moment, which is that I am not brave, but I am extremely tired of being quiet. "The barges draw 11 hands loaded," I said. "The upper river runs 9 before the second thaw. You will pay 4 marks the barge for grain that stops at Kelsford, and then you will pay again to bring it up by cart, and the cart road is not yours after the bridge, it is Westwater's, so you will pay the toll to the same house that sold you the grain. Twice. For the same sack." The fire cracked. One of the lords laughed, and then realized nobody else was going to and stopped. Varric did not laugh. He looked at me for what felt like a very long time, and was probably 3 seconds, and then he looked down at the charcoal map and put 1 finger on the bend above Kelsford. And he said quietly, to the table, "She is right. Take the toll out and bring me the number again tomorrow." That was all. They went back to it. I stood at the wall. He said my name at the end of the evening, when the lords had gone. Just the once, to dismiss me. He said, "Mira." And the way he said it was completely ordinary, and I got the jug against my hip, and went out and got 3 steps down the passage before I had to stop and put my hand flat on the cold wall. He said my name. It is a name. Everyone has one. I have had this one for 19 years, and it has never once made my knees stop working, and I would like to file a complaint with whoever is in charge of my knees. Aldrich was waiting at the bottom of the stair. "That was very clever," he said. "Do it again, and you will be in the kitchens by the week's end, and I will tell him it was your own request." He smiled at me with perfect politeness, the way you smile at a servant in front of witnesses. "There are no witnesses now, so understand me. You are 1,100 marks, and 330 days. That is all you are. He has forgotten your face already." I went down to the underhall and lay on the straw in the dark, with 11 women breathing around me. He had not forgotten my face. That was the problem. If he had forgotten my face, I could have done the year on my hands and knees and walked out of the gate and never thought about the North again. Instead, I lay there in the dark and thought, he stepped back so fast. 3 days after the solar, Aldrich moved me to the counting room. He did it with his teeth showing. He came to the underhall himself before the first bell, which stewards do not do, and he stood in the doorway while 11 women pretended to be asleep, and he said, "You are wanted in accounts. Apparently you have opinions about barges." I got up, and I put on the gray dress, and I followed him across the yard in the dark, and the whole way I was working out how this was a punishment, because it had to be. Aldrich did not give people better places. The counting room is warm. It has a window. There is no serving in it, and nobody watches you eat. I sat down at a table with 11 ledgers on it, and I understood within an hour. They were a disaster. Not fraud, which would have been simpler. Neglect. 20 years of a house too big for its clerks, entries in 4 hands, tolls recorded in one book and paid out of another, 3 separate columns for the same Westwater grain under 3 different names. It was the kind of mess that takes one person a season to unpick, and that everybody in a house knows about and nobody will touch, because whoever touches it becomes responsible for it. Aldrich had given me the thing that could not be finished. If I did it badly, he had me. If I did it well, he had me for longer. And either way, I was out of the hall, out of the solar, out of any room the king walked through. That was the clever part, and I have to give him credit, because it took me 3 weeks to see it. So I did the ledgers. I did them properly, because I do not know how to do them the other way, and because after 19 years beside my father's counting table, it was the first thing since the spring that felt like standing on my own floor. I took the tolls out of the second book and put them where they belonged. I found 400 marks that had been paid twice to Westwater over 6 years. I found it on a Tuesday, and I sat looking at it for a long time, because 400 marks is a third of what I was, and it had been sitting in a book in a warm room the whole time. And this is where it started, the thing I could not explain. The ledgers came back to me corrected, not by a clerk. There were 3 clerks, and I knew all 3 hands by then, the round one, the cramped one, and old Phoenix, which shook. This was a 4th hand, small, hard, very fast, the letters leaning forward, and it appeared in the margins of the books I had left on the table overnight. Not corrections of my arithmetic. My arithmetic was fine. It was other things. Against the Kelsford toll in the margin. The bridge is his by charter, not by right. Check the charter date. Against a grain entry from 4 winters back, where I had noted a shortfall and could not account for it. This was the year of the fever. Half the East Road did not sow. Not theft. Against my own note where I had written that the northern tally made no sense, it does not. It has not, since my father's time. Keep going. I asked Fenwick, who came into the counting room at night. Fenwick, who was 70 and had opinions about everything, went completely still, and then said, "Nobody, girl," and did not look up from his page. And that was how I knew. I want to describe what that did to me, because I think it is the actual hinge of the whole year, and it does not look like anything from the outside. A king had come into a counting room at night and read a bound servant's work and written in the margin, "Keep going. Not thank you. Not well done. Keep going." Which is the only thing anyone has ever said to me that I actually needed. And he had said it to a book, in the dark, where he did not have to. and in the daylight he did not look at me. Not once, that whole month. I passed him twice in the West Passage, and he went by as if I were a door. So there were two of him, and I did not know which one was the lie. The other thing happened at the end of that month, and it was smaller and it was worse. There was a woman called Hannah in the kitchens who had come off the same auction as me, a year older, with a bad chest. In the second month it got worse, and she could not work the full rotation, and the rule in the Ashfell is the rule everywhere in the north. Days you do not work are added to your year. Hannah had lost 9 days by the feast of the equinox. 9 days becomes 18, becomes a second year, and everybody in the underhall had watched it happen to somebody before. I went to Aldrich about it, which was stupid, and he explained the rule to me in the tone you use with a child, and I said the rule was going to kill her, and he said the rule was the rule. So I did the other thing. There is a ledger in the counting room where the bound days are entered before they go up on the slate, and I had it in front of me every morning, and I knew exactly which line Hannah's 9 days were on, and exactly what it would take to make them not be there. I did not do it. I want to be very clear, because I thought about it for 4 nights, and I got as far as having the pen in my hand. I did not do it because I had spent 19 years learning from my father that the book is the one thing in the world that does not lie, and if I put a lie in it, then everything else I had written in that room was worth nothing, including the 400 marks, including all of it. What I did instead was worse for me and better for her. I wrote it up. Formally, in the proper hand, on the proper paper, a submission to the House that the bound day rule as applied to illness was costing the Ashfell more in dead servants than it saved in service, with the numbers, over 6 years, from their own books. 22 women, 411 days added. 9 of the 22 never finished their year at all, which meant the house had bought a debt and got a grave, and I put the cost of that in marks in the last column because that was the only language the house spoke, and I signed it. With my name, and under my name. Bound service, 301 days remaining. Fenwick watched me put it on the steward's tray, and he said, "You have just handed Aldrich a knife and told him where you sleep." "I know. Do you?" He shook his head. "You have made it his to lose, girl. Nothing makes a man crueler." I lay awake that night doing the arithmetic on what it costs to be right in a house where you are a line item, and I got no answer at all, and I did it again anyway. 4 days later, the rule changed. Not announced. There was no proclamation, nobody stood up in the hall. The slate simply had different numbers on it one morning, and Hannah's 9 days were gone. And the notice pinned outside the steward's room said that from the equinox, days lost to sickness attested by the house physician would not be added to the term, and it was signed with the king's seal, and nobody had ever heard of such a thing. Bess read it 4 times. Then she looked at me. "What did you do?" "Nothing," I said. And it was true. And it was the least true thing I have ever said. Aldrich found me in the passage that afternoon. He had the submission in his hand. He held it up so I could see my own name on the bottom of it. "You went over me," he said. "I went through you. It was on your tray." He read it in front of the council. Aldrich's voice had gone very quiet and very pleasant. He read your name out. "Do you understand what you have done? You have made yourself visible, a bound woman with a name and an opinion." He folded the paper in half, once, badly, and put it in his sleeve. "There are 300 days left on you. I am going to be here for every one of them." He walked off, and I stood in the passage and I was shaking. And underneath the shaking there was something absolutely unbearable, which was that I was pleased. He read your name out. The Westwater party came up the river in the last week before midsummer, and with them came Lady Serene, and the whole castle changed shape in a day. You can tell what a house actually is by what it does when guests are coming. The Ashfell scrubbed. They hung the hall with the old banners. They brought the good plate up from the vault. They put fresh rushes down and lit the second range of candles that had not been lit since the king's father. and Aldrich walked around with a list looking almost happy. And they moved me back to the hall service. Aldrich did that personally. "You will serve at the high table," he said. "You did want to be seen." I understood. Lady Serene had been in the Hall of Accounts on the day of the auction. She had laughed with 2 fingers at her mouth. Aldrich was going to put me in front of her with a jug in my hands and let the year do the rest. What I did not understand, and what nobody told me, is that the Westwater party was not a visit. It was a negotiation. And the thing being negotiated was a marriage, and the marriage was the price of the Northern Road. I learned that the way servants learn everything, which is standing at a wall while men who have forgotten you are there, talk about the price of things. 3 nights of it. 3 nights of carrying wine to a table where a woman in white fur sat at the king's right hand and put her fingers on his sleeve when she laughed, and where Lord Corvin of the Westwater said the word alliance, the way a butcher says the word joint, and where Varick sat with his back straight and said almost nothing, and drank almost nothing, and got up in the middle of the second course on the second night and left, and the whole table pretended it had not happened. I served him from the left. He did not look at me. I put the jug down and took it away, 4 nights running, and he did not look at me. And I told myself that was correct and appropriate and exactly what should happen. And I got angrier every single night. On the 4th night, Serene spoke to me. She did it beautifully. She waited until the hall was quiet between courses, so that the whole high table and the 2 tables below it would hear. And she turned in her chair and looked up at me at the wall, and said, in a voice like a bell, "You are the one from the auction." 300 faces. Again. "Yes, my lady. 1100 marks." She said the number the way you would read it off a tag. I remember, because I was surprised. "It is a great deal of money for a grain man's daughter." She smiled and turned very slightly toward Varick without taking her eyes off me. "Your Majesty was generous. Or perhaps you simply do not haggle." Somebody laughed. Lord Corvin laughed. "I have often thought it," Serene went on, "that a debt like that must be a strange thing to carry. Do you think about it? The sum? Or is it easier not to?" I stood there with a jug in my hands. And I want to record exactly what happened inside me, because it was not what I expected. What I felt was not shame. I had done shame already, in the Hall of Accounts, in front of 400 people, and it turns out you can only do that properly once. What I felt was a kind of terrible clarity, the way you feel when you finally see the whole ledger at once. "I think about it every day, my lady," I said. 3 marks a day. That is what 1100 over a year works out to. A kitchen woman earns 2 coppers. So I think about it in the mornings mostly, when the slate goes up. The hall had gone very quiet. "How exact?" Serene said. "It is a number, my lady. Numbers are exact. It is the only part of this that is." And then, because I had already jumped, and because there is no halfway point, once you have said something like that at a high table. "May I ask you something? You said it was a great deal of money." "It is. It is 4 barges of Westwater grain at 4 marks the barge, plus the Kelsford toll, twice, which is what your house has been charging this one for 6 years for the same sack. So by your own price, my lady, I cost about as much as 1 bad spring." Nothing, not a sound in that hall. Then Corvin's chair scraped, and Aldrich was moving along the wall toward me with his face white, and I thought, well, that is the yard, and everyone will watch, and Bess told me on the first day. Varick stood up. He did it without hurry, and the whole room got to its feet because you do not sit when the king stands, and Serene's hand came off his sleeve, and he said to the hall, "We will finish this tomorrow." And then to Aldrich without looking at him, "She is not to be touched." And he walked out through the door behind the dais. Aldrich took the jug out of my hands and sent me after him. which was the only cruelty left available to him. And it was a good one, because it meant I had to go and be dealt with alone. The solar, the fire down to embers. He was standing at the window with his back to the room and his hands behind him, and I came in and shut the door and stood at the mat and waited to be broken. "One bad spring," he said. "Your Majesty." "No." He turned around. "Do not do that. You have not called me that once in your head all year. I would be astonished if you started now. That was not what I was braced for. Nothing about that was what I was braced for." He crossed the room, not fast. He stopped closer than anyone in that castle had stood to me since the auction, close enough that I had to look up, close enough that I could see that the tiredness went further into his face than I had thought, and he did not touch me, and he did not sit down, and he said, "Say the rest of it." "There is no rest of it." "There is. You stopped." His jaw moved. "You have stopped every time. In the solar with the barges, you stopped. In the submission, you stopped. You put the cost of 9 dead women in a column in marks, and you did not write the sentence underneath it. And I read that page 4 times looking for the sentence." He breathed out. "Say the rest of it. In this room it costs you nothing." And I lost my temper. 10 weeks of it, all at once, in a room with the King of the North. "The rest of it is that you said I cost you nothing." My voice did not shake, and I have never been prouder of anything. In front of 400 people. You said it like the weather. And then you paid 1,100 marks, and folded the paper into 4, and put it in your coat. And I have spent every night since the spring trying to make those 2 things be the same man, and I cannot do it. And it is making me insane. And you will not look at me. You look at my handwriting. You come into a room at night and you write in the margin of a book and you tell a book to keep going, and in the daylight, I am a door. He had gone absolutely still. "So, which is the lie?" I said. "Because I would genuinely rather know." He looked at me and something came apart behind his face and he said low, "It was the only way to end the bidding." "What?" "Corvin's man had the paper. He was going to take the debt." His hands had come out from behind his back, and he had them half up as if the sentence were a thing he could hold. "If I had bid for you as a man bids for something he wants, he would have gone to 2,000 and I would have had to stop, and you would have gone west with the Westwater party that same night. The only price nobody will bid against is nothing. So I told a hall of 400 people that you were worth nothing, and I did it loudly, and it worked, and it is the single worst thing I have ever done." I could not speak. He was very close. I could feel the heat off his chest through 2 layers of wool, and he had not put a finger on me, and his hands were still up in the air between us doing nothing, and I watched him decide, twice, and not. "Every time I come near you," he said, quieter, "I make it worse for you. If I look at you in that hall, Aldrich knows, and Serene knows, and by the spring somebody has used you against me and you are dead. So I do not look at you." A breath. "It is not discipline. Do not give me that much credit. It is arithmetic. You would understand it. Do not move. Do not move. Do not move." I moved. Half a step. It was not a decision. It was a fact. The way falling is a fact. And his hand came up, and his fingers had actually touched the sleeve at my elbow. The door opened. Aldrich with a candle, and behind him Lord Corvin of the Westwater, and a face on each of them that I have thought about for the rest of my life. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Aldrich said, and he was looking at the space between us and measuring it. "Lord Corvin insists. The Westwater terms are ready to be signed tonight." Varric's hand was already back at his side. He had put a yard between us before the door finished opening, and his face had shut like a book, and he said, "Bring them in." I got out of that room. I got down the stair and across the yard, and I stood in the cold with my back against the wall of the underhall and my hands over my face. That was the night they signed the betrothal. They announced it at midsummer and set the wedding for the first day of autumn, which gave the Ashfell 70 days to prepare and gave me 70 days to get through, and I had 240 on the slate. I have thought a great deal about why I did not simply keep my head down for those 70 days. I had every reason to. I have never been able to produce a satisfying answer, so I will just put down what happened. The counting room went quiet. Aldrich took me off the hall service entirely, which was the first kind thing he ever did, and he did it for a cruel reason. A bound woman in the hall during a betrothal is a story waiting to be told, and Aldrich protected the house, always, before anything. So I sat in a warm room with 11 ledgers, and I did not see Varick for 19 days. On the 20th day, Fenwick died. He went in the night, at his own table, with a pen still in his hand, and the East Road tallies open in front of him, and I found him in the morning, because I always came first. He was 71. He had been in that room for 53 years. There was no family. The house paid for the burning because the house pays for the burning of its own, and 11 people came, which for 53 years of service in a great house is what you get. I stayed after, not for any reason. I did not know him well. I stayed because the yard was empty, and I did not want to go back to the room where he had died, and I sat down on the wall by the burning ground in the dark with my arms around my knees, and I was still there an hour later when someone sat down on the wall a yard away from me. He did not say anything for a while. Neither did I. Then he said, "He taught me to read a ledger. My father would not have it, a prince doing clerk's work. Fenwick did it anyway, in that room at night, for 2 years. A pause. He used to write in the margins, small hand leaning forward. I copy it. I have never been able to stop copying it." I sat very still. "You knew I knew," I said. "I knew you knew after the 3rd book. You could have said something. In daylight. Once." "Yes," he said. "I could have." The fire had gone down to a red bed, and the smoke was going straight up because there was no wind that night, and the whole valley was silent, and I want to be honest that this was the single most dangerous hour of my life, and it did not feel dangerous at all. It felt like being warm. "Ask me," he said. "Ask you what?" "Whatever you have been carrying since the solar. I owe you one answer, and I will give you one honestly. And then we will not do this again, because I am to be married in 50 days, and there is a limit to what I can do to you and still call myself anything." I could have asked him 100 things. I have listed them since, many times in the dark. I asked the one I could not put down. "Why did you fold the paper?" He turned his head. "On the dais," I said. "The clerk had the tray out. You folded the Crown's copy into quarters and put it in your coat. Why?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he was not going to answer at all. Then he reached inside his coat, left side, and took it out, and held it in the light of the burning ground, and I stopped breathing. It was soft. That is the thing I was not ready for. Paper that has been folded once and put away stays crisp for years. This paper had gone furry at the creases, the way a thing does when it is opened and opened again, hundreds of times, and one corner was worn almost through, and it had been folded and refolded so often that it no longer lay flat at all. "Because I say a number in a hall and then it is done," he said. "The hall forgets. Corvin forgets by the 2nd course. Serene has certainly forgotten." He turned it over in his fingers. "I did not want to forget. So I put it where I would feel it every time I moved, and I read it, and I keep reading it, and it says the same thing every time." "What does it say?" 1,100 marks, 1 year. He looked up. "And a name. It has your name on it, and I put a price of nothing beside your name in front of 400 people, and I have carried that against my ribs for 126 days. I did not know I was crying until it was already happening, which is humiliating, and I did not do anything about it. "Give it to me," I said. "No." "Then let me hold it." He put it in my hand. I have handled a great many documents. I know what a paper feels like when it has been lived with. This one was warm from his chest and worn through at the corner, and I turned it over, and there was my own name in the clerk's round hand under a sum, and under that, in the margin, in a small, hard, forward-leaning script, in ink so old it had gone brown, 4 words that were not part of any contract. Not for the year I looked up at him. And he was already looking at me, and the space between us was nothing at all, and neither of us had moved, and both of us had, and his hand came up, and his thumb went along my cheekbone under my eye where the wet was, and it was the first time he had touched my face, and he did it, as if it might come off in his hand. "Say it," I said. My voice came out wrecked. "You told me to say the rest of it. You say it, once, out loud, to me, not to a margin." His hand was still on my face. He had his forehead almost against mine. I could feel him breathing. And he said, "If I say it, I cannot unsay it. And in 50 days, I am going to stand in front of the northern houses and give my word to a woman I have met 11 times. And the day I break that word, Corvin closes the river, and 4,000 people on the East Road do not eat in the spring." That is the arithmetic. It has not changed since midsummer. It is not going to change. That is not what I asked. I know what you asked. His voice cracked right down the middle of it. I am telling you what it costs. Then let it cost. He kissed me. I want to be accurate about it because I have been accurate about everything else. It was not gentle, and it was not any of the things I had imagined lying on the straw in the underhall. It was a man who had been holding a door shut for 126 days, taking his shoulder off it. His hand went into my hair at the back of my head, and mine were in the front of his coat, gripping, and the paper was still in my fist, and I did not care about the paper, and it went on long enough that I forgot entirely where we were sitting and what was 50 days away. He stopped it. Not me. He put his forehead down on my shoulder and stayed there with his hand flat on my back, and he did not let go, and he did not go on. And I felt him get his breathing back one piece at a time. "Mira," he said into my shoulder. And then, across the yard, a bell. Not the hour bell. The gate bell, 3 strokes, which means a rider at night, which never happens except when it does. He was on his feet before the 3rd stroke finished, and I watched the whole thing come back down over him, the straight back and the shut face and the yard of air, and it took about 2 seconds, and he was very good at it, and I hated how good at it he was. "Go to the counting room," he said. "Not the underhall. The counting room, and bolt it. Varric. Please." He had not turned around. "One thing. Do one thing I ask." I went to the counting room. I bolted the door. I sat at my table in the dark, with the dead man's pen still lying where he had dropped it. And I opened my fist, and I was still holding it. The contract, worn through at the corner, warm. He had not taken it back. The rider was from the East Road. The fever had come back, not the great one from 4 winters ago, a smaller one, in 3 villages, but the same shape, and it came at exactly the wrong moment because the East Road grain was still in the ground, and the Westwater grain was still the price of a wedding. By the 3rd day, there were 11 dead. By the 9th, there were 60, and the council sat every night. And I heard it all from the counting room because the counting room shares a wall with the council chamber, and I had stopped pretending I did not listen. Corvin's price went up. That is what happens. That is what has always happened. A house that is bleeding does not get a better bargain. It gets a worse one. And Lord Corvin of the Westwater sat in that chamber for 9 nights and moved the terms, 1 piece at a time, with the patience of a man dressing a wound he had opened himself. On the 9th night, he asked for the tolls. I heard the number through the wall, and I put my pen down. The Kelsford toll in perpetuity, ceded to Westwater, in exchange for the grain to come up before the frost. It was the 400 marks I had found in the ledger, and it was the same 400 marks every year forever, and it was the thing my father died finding out. And I heard Varric say yes. I sat in a warm room on the other side of a wall, and heard the King of the North give away the northern road because 60 people were dead on the east road, and the grain was in Westwater barns. And I understood, completely, for the first time, that he had never once been lying to me about the arithmetic. They set the wedding forward. 10 days. Aldrich came to the counting room the next morning to tell me, personally, which is how I knew he had been waiting weeks for it. "There will be a feast on the eve," he said. "Every bound servant serves. That is the custom." He set the rotation on my table with one finger and turned it so I could read it. My name was at the top. High table. "You will pour for the bride." I looked at it for a while. "Do you want me to say something?" I said. "Is that what this is?" "No." He straightened up. And then, unexpectedly, he sat down on the corner of Fenwick's old table, and something in his face was almost human, and it was worse than the cruelty. "I want you to understand where you are, because you do not, and you never have, and it is going to get you killed." He read your name to the council. He changed a 200-year rule because you put 9 dead women in a column. Corvin's man has been asking in the kitchens who you are for a month. He tapped the rotation. "There are 211 days on your slate. If you are in that hall on the eve looking like you look at him, Corvin will know by the second course, and he will have a hold on this house that no treaty can undo, and the thing he uses to hold it will be you. Not the king. You. You are the cheapest piece on that board, and you are the only one nobody will miss." I did not answer, because there was nothing in it that was not true. "Serve, pour, keep your eyes down, and get through 211 days, Aldrich said, getting up. "I am not your enemy in this, whatever you think of me. I am the only person in this castle whose job is the house, and not the man." The eve of the wedding was the 11th of autumn, and the hall had 400 people in it, and every candle in the ashfell was lit. I poured for the bride. She was radiant. I want that on the record too, because it would be easier if she had been a monster, and she was not. She was 24 years old, and she had been sold as surely as I had, for a river and a road, and she knew it, and she carried it beautifully. And once during the second course, she put her hand over her cup so I would not fill it, and said thank you, without looking up. And I have never wanted so badly for someone to be terrible. Varric did not look at me. Not once. 211 days of practice, and he did it perfectly. And I stood at the wall between courses with my hands folded and watched him not look at me. And I understood that this was him keeping me alive, and it did not help at all. Corvin stood at the end of the third course with his cup up and made the speech. The road, the river, the 2 houses, the spring. And then, because he was a man who could not leave a thing alone, he said, "And let it be said, the North bargains hard. This house paid 1,100 marks for a grain man's daughter, and would not go a copper over for a bride." He smiled down the table. "We settled for the road instead." The laugh went through the hall the way it had in the Hall of Accounts, left to right, over me, and out. I stood at the wall with a jug in my hands, and I did not move my face, because I had learned that on the block in the spring, and I had had a great deal of practice since. Varric's hand was flat on the table. I watched it. I watched every tendon in it stand up and then go down again as he made it lie flat, and he raised his cup with the other hand and he said, "To the spring," and 300 voices said it back. That was the moment, not the auction, not the solar, not the burning ground, not the kiss. That was the moment, standing at a wall holding a jug, when I finally understood that he was going to do it. He was going to marry her in the morning, and he was right to. and there were 4,000 people on the East Road who would eat because of it. And I had spent a whole summer waiting for a door that was never going to open, because a man I loved was, as it turned out, exactly the man I thought he was. He is going to do it. He is going to stand up in the morning and do it. And I will be at the back of the chapel with the other bound servants, and I will hold a jug. There is no version of this where the ledger balances. I have run it every way it goes. There is no line I have not counted. It does not balance, and it is not going to. Afterward, in the passage, someone caught my sleeve, and for one entire second I was stupid enough to think it was him. It was Bess. Kitchen. Now, she said, and her face was wrong. The kitchen was empty, and the fires were banked, and she stood with her back to the door. Corvin's man came to me tonight, she said. Offered me 9 marks. 9 marks, girl. That is 4 years of my life. Her hands were shaking. He wanted me to say I had seen you and the king. He had it written already on paper, in a fair hand, and all I had to do was make my mark on it. He said it does not have to be true. He said nobody asks a bound woman to be true. They only ask her to make her mark. What did you do? I said no. She laughed, badly. I said no, and then I walked out. And then I stood in the yard for a quarter hour, and I thought about 9 marks. And I want you to know that I thought about it, because I am not going to stand here and be a saint about it. She wiped her face. He will find someone else. There are 11 of us in that hall, and any one of them would take 9 marks, and so would I, on a different night. And I stood in that kitchen and did the last piece of arithmetic of the whole summer. Corvin did not need it to be true. He needed it to exist, a paper with a mark on it, held in a drawer in the Westwater. And from the day the wedding was done, he would own the King of the North outright, and he would use it for 30 years, and there would be nothing anyone could do about it because the woman on the paper was a line item with 211 days on a slate. The only thing on that board that Corvin was buying was me, and a thing that has already been bought cannot be bought again. I went to the counting room. I lit 1 candle, and I took the worn contract out of the front of my dress, where it had been for 9 days, and I flattened it on the table with both hands, and I read it properly for the first time. Not the sum, not the name, the whole thing, every clause, the way my father taught me to read a paper before you sign it. The debt could be assumed by any lord of the North. Assumed, not bought. Assumed. And there it was, in the 4th clause, in the ordinary, careful language of a 200-year-old law that had never once been written with a woman like me in mind. A debt assumed may be discharged in full at any time by any party, whereupon the term is void and the bound is free of the house from the hour of discharge. Any party. I sat down very slowly. 400 marks. 6 years of a toll paid twice to the Westwater, sitting in a book in a warm room, found by me on a Tuesday, entered in my own hand, and owed by Westwater to the Ashfell. And I had spent all summer being furious that nobody would give it back. I did not need anyone to give it back. I needed one person, with standing to bring a claim in the Hall of Accounts, to bring it on the morning of a wedding, in front of 400 witnesses, with the books to prove it. I did not sleep. I did not go back to the underhall. I sat in the counting room with 11 ledgers and 1 candle, and I built it the way my father built a case, line by line, 6 years of it, every double entry, every toll, cross-reference to Westwater's own bills of lading which were in our books because they had sent them to us, and I wrote it all out in a fair hand on 9 sheets, and at the top I wrote the only heading it needed, which was the sum. At the 4th bell, I put the pen down. Then I took the 9th sheet, and I wrote 1 more line at the bottom, and I signed my own name under it, and it said, "The claimant tenders 411 marks against the debt of Mira, daughter of Halden, factor of the Northern Road, and requires the same be discharged in full this hour. The Hall of Accounts opens at the 1st bell every day of the year, including the day of a royal wedding, because the law does not take holidays. There is a clerk, and a rail, and a bell you ring if you have business, and any free person of the North may bring a claim, and it has been that way for 200 years, and nobody has ever thought about it very hard. I was there when they unbarred the door. The clerk was old and cross, and had not been told about any of it. I put 9 sheets on the rail in front of him, and I said, "A claim of the Ashfell against the House of Westwater, and a tender of discharge. I will wait." He read the first page and stopped being cross. I want to say that I was calm. I had been calm all night, the terrible mechanical calm of a person doing arithmetic instead of feeling something. And it lasted exactly until the clerk sent the runner, and I heard the runner's feet go up the passage toward the great hall where 400 people were dressing for a wedding, and then my hands started shaking so badly I had to hold the rail. They came within the quarter hour. All of them. Corvin first, in Westwater blue, with his son and 2 men. Then Aldrich, white to the lips. Then the Northern Lords, in 1s and 2s, and then in a crowd, because word had gone through the castle the way it does. And by the time the bell rang the second time, there were 200 people in the Hall of Accounts on the morning of a wedding, standing where they had stood in the spring to watch a debt auction. And then Varek, in the black coat, with Serene on his arm in white. He stopped when he saw me at the rail. I have gone over his face a great many times since. There was nothing on it. That was the thing. He had spent 200 days making his face do nothing, and on the last morning it worked perfectly, and I could not read one single thing in it, and I had to do the whole rest of it blind. "Read the claim," Corvin said to the clerk. "Whatever this is, read it, and let us get on." So the clerk read it. It took 11 minutes. 6 years of the Kelsford toll, paid by the Ashfell to the Westwater on grain the Westwater had already been paid for, entered twice, in 2 books, under 3 names, 411 marks, with the bills of lading, which Westwater had sent to us themselves, cited by date and by barge. Nobody in that hall moved. Great houses do not steal from one another. They are permitted to be hard, and they are permitted to be greedy, and they are not permitted to be caught doing arithmetic badly in front of the Northern Lords. And I had known that when I wrote it, and I had written it that way on purpose. Corvin said, "This is a servant's paper." "It is the Ashfell's books," Aldrich said. His voice came out strange. He was looking at the 9 sheets on the rail. "In the Ashfell's hand. I can attest the entries. I have been attesting them for 11 years. Something happened in his face then that I did not expect, and have never entirely forgiven myself for finding funny. Badly, apparently. "And the last line," the clerk said, because clerks are literal, and read it out. "The claimant tenders 411 marks against the debt of Mira, daughter of Haldan, and requires the same be discharged in full this hour." "On what standing?" Corvin said. He had gone the color of the wall. "A bound woman cannot bring a claim." "No," I said. "A bound woman cannot bring a claim. That is why the claim is the Ashfell's and not mine. I am not the claimant, my lord. I am the debt." I turned to the rail and I said it to the clerk, because the law is a room, and you have to speak to the right part of it. The 4th clause. A debt assumed may be discharged in full at any time by any party. The Westwater owes this house 411 marks. I am asking that the Westwater's debt be applied to mine. It is the same book. It is 2 lines. You do not even need to move the money. The Hall of Accounts made a noise I have never heard a room make before or since. Because it was funny. That is the part I had not planned for. 200 Northern Lords worked it out at the same time, and every one of them understood at once that Corvin was about to be forced, in public, on the morning of his daughter's wedding, to hand over 400 marks he had stolen in order to set free the woman he had been intending to use as a knife. And they laughed, all of them, and it went through the hall left to right, and over Corvin and out the far side. He stood in it. He did not move his face. He was very good at it, too. "I will not," he said. "You will," said the clerk, "or the claim goes to the crown, my lord, and the crown will hear it in the spring assembly with the books read out entire." Your Majesty. Corvin turned. This is a trick of a servant. Tell them. And I looked at Varric for the first time since he came through the door, and he was already looking at me, and he had stopped bothering with his face. He let go of Serene's arm. He walked the length of the Hall of Accounts in front of 200 people, and he stopped at the rail beside me, and he said to the clerk, in a voice that carried the way it had carried in the spring, "The claim is the house's, and I attest it. Discharge the debt." "Your Majesty," Aldrich said quietly, urgently, "if she is free, the Westwater will—" "I know what the Westwater will do." He had not looked away from the clerk. "Discharge it. Now, this hour, as it is written." The clerk dipped the pen. He drew the line. It takes about 2 seconds to unmake a person's whole year, and it is not dramatic at all. It is a man with a pen putting a stroke through a line in a book. "The debt of Mira, daughter of Haldan, is discharged in full," he said. "She is free of the house from this hour." And then Varric turned to the hall and to Corvin, and he said the second thing, and this is the one the North still talks about. "The wedding is broken. The terms are void. Not because of this woman." He said it flatly, into 200 faces. "Because you sent your man into my kitchens with 9 marks and a paper already written, to buy a lie about her, and I have known it since the eve, and I was going to marry your daughter anyway. That is what I was going to do. I want the northern houses to know exactly what I was going to do, because I will not have it said afterward that I was noble about any part of this." Serene of the Westwater stood alone in the middle of the floor in her wedding white. She looked at her father for a long moment. Then she walked out of the Hall of Accounts without a word to anybody, and I have thought about her often since, and I am glad she got out of that morning with her back straight. The grain came anyway. That is the part nobody tells properly, because it is not exciting. The East Road fever burned out in the 3rd week of autumn, and the grain came up the river in the spring at 6 marks the barge from a house in the South Reach that nobody had bothered to ask, and 4,000 people ate. And the northern road stayed the ash fells. It cost more. It cost a great deal more. The arithmetic was survivable, and it had been survivable the entire time, and no one had run it, because the only person in that castle who ran the numbers all the way to the bottom had been standing at a wall holding a jug. He came to the counting room that night. I heard him on the stair. I had been sitting in the dark for 2 hours, free, with nowhere in particular to be for the first time since the spring, and I heard him come up and stop outside the door, and not knock. I opened it. He was still in the black coat. He looked like a man who had been awake for 3 days, which he had. "You can go," he said. "That is what I came to say. There is a horse and there is money that is not the house's. It is mine, and the South Reach Road is open until the frost. And if you go tonight, you will be past Kelsford by morning." He swallowed. "Corvin will not touch a free woman with 200 lords as witness. You are safe. You are actually safe. I have made certain of it. It is the only thing I have done properly in a year." "Is that what you want?" "No." He said it immediately, like a man dropping something heavy. "God, no." "Then ask me to stay." "I cannot ask you that." His hand was on the doorframe and it was white at the knuckles. "You have been mine on paper for 211 days. You were freed this morning. If I ask you tonight, you will never know, and neither will I, whether you—" "Varric. Whether it was ever a choice, and I will not do that to you. I have already done every other—" "Varric." I put my hand flat on his chest. "Left side, where it used to be. It is empty." He stopped. "Your coat," I said. "It has been empty for 9 days. I have had it. I read it. There is a line in the margin in Fennec's hand that says not for the year, in ink that is 6 years old, and you were 19 when he wrote it, and I do not think he was writing about me. He was not." His voice had gone. "He wrote it about my father's marriage. He wrote it on my mother's contract. Then here. I took it out of the front of my dress, worn soft, folded in 4. I put it in his hand and closed his fingers over it. Now ask me. He looked at his own hand for a moment. Then he said, Stay. And it was not a king asking anything. I do not know which of us moved. I have never known. His hand came up into my hair, and mine were in the front of that coat again, the way they had been at the burning ground, gripping. And this time nobody rang a bell, and nobody opened a door, and there was no arithmetic left anywhere in the world. He got the door shut with his shoulder. I remember the candle going over. I remember laughing into his mouth about the candle. I remember that his hands shook, which undid me completely, and that he said my name twice against my throat, and that when I finally got the coat off him, there was a scar under his collarbone the size of a hand that I had never seen and did not ask about that night. I remember that he stopped once, with his forehead against mine, and said, Tell me to stop. And I said no. And then the counting room went dark, because the candle was on the floor. I woke up with his arm heavy across my ribs, and the whole east window gone gold, and I lay there and did absolutely nothing about it for a very long time. The counting room has one window, and it faces the gorge, and in autumn, the sun comes up over the far ridge at about the 6th bell, and comes in flat and low, and turns the whole room the color of honey. I had watched it happen 200 times from a chair with a pen in my hand. It is quite different from the floor, under a coat, with a king asleep against your back. He had not gone. That was the first thought. Not a noble thought. It is the one I had. The second was that the fire was out, and the flagstones were freezing, and he was extremely warm, and I did the arithmetic on getting up to fetch wood versus not getting up, and not getting up won by a wide margin, and I went back to sleep. When I woke again, the light had moved, and he was awake, on his side, propped on one elbow, looking at me. How long have you been doing that? Some time. That is an unsettling answer. You do a thing, he said. When you sleep, your hand moves. Like this. He did it, with 2 fingers on the flagstone, small and quick, 4 little strokes. You are writing, in your sleep. You have been adding something up for an hour. I have not. You have. You did it at the burning ground too, when you fell asleep on the wall for a quarter hour, and I sat there and watched a woman balance a ledger with her eyes shut and thought, well, that is it then. That is the end of me. I put my hand over my face. He pulled it off, and kept it, and turned it over, and looked at the ink on the side of my middle finger where it always is, and did not say anything for a while. There was a scar under his collarbone. In the daylight I could see all of it. It was old, and it was very bad, and it had not been stitched by anyone who knew what they were doing. You can ask, he said. I was not going to. I know. That is why you can. So I put 2 fingers on it and I said, What happened? My brother. He said it evenly. I was 15. He was 22 and he wanted the seat and he was not clever about it. He came into my room at night. A pause. That is why I turn my head when someone comes at my right shoulder. It is why I do not let anyone stand behind me, and why nobody in that hall has touched me in 9 years, and why I heard you on a stair from 30 feet with a dog between us. He looked at the ceiling. It is not mystery. It is just an old thing that has never gone away. Where is he now? The South Reach. He has a farm and 4 children, and I send him money twice a year, and we have not spoken in 19 years. He shrugged one shoulder, the good one. My father wanted him executed in the yard, in front of the house. I would not have it. I was 15, and I stood in front of the whole court, and I would not have it. And I think it is the only decision of my life I have never once revisited at 3 in the morning. I lay there and thought about a boy of 15 refusing to let a hall watch a punishment. And then I thought about a slate in a steward's room, and a bell, and a woman with red hands saying you get the yard in front of everyone. And after that, they all know your face. That is why the rule changed, I said. He turned his head. The sick days. Aldrich said it was 200 years old and nobody had ever touched it. You changed it in 4 days because I put 9 dead women in a column. I sat up on one elbow. But it was not the column, was it? It was the yard. You have been quietly taking the watching out of this castle for 19 years. He did not answer that, which is an answer. I have a question, I said, and I want you to know that I have been holding it since the spring, and I am about to be very undignified about it. Go on. 1,100 marks. I sat all the way up, with the coat around me. The debt was 1,100. Corvin's man would have gone to 2,000. You said so. You said the only price nobody bids against is nothing. And that is why you said what you said. I pointed at him. But you did not pay 1,100. I have done the Ashfell's books for 6 months. I have seen the Crown's disbursement for the spring assizes, and I know to the copper what left this house in the week of the auction. He had begun, very slightly, to smile. Do not, I said. I have not said anything. You paid 12,000 marks. The Crown's price for a debt at auction is the debt, he said mildly. The Crown's price for a debt at auction that the Crown would very much prefer not to be sold to Westwater, on the day the Westwater is negotiating for the Northern Road, is, it turns out, somewhat higher. 12,000. 12,000 marks. That is not a debt. That is not within sight of a debt. That is a year of the Northern Road. That is the entire Kelsford toll for 30 years. That is... No. Absolutely not. I am not doing that arithmetic in this room, on this floor, with this man watching my face, at 6 o'clock in the morning. You told a hall of 400 people that I cost you nothing, I said, and you had just paid 12,000 marks. Yes. And you carried the paper against your chest for 200 days, because you could not stand having said it. Yes. You are the stupidest man in the North. There is a very strong argument for it, he agreed, and pulled me back down. We stayed on that floor until the 9th bell, which is 4 hours past when the King of the North is supposed to be anywhere. And at some point somebody came up the stair and got as far as the door and heard something and went away again very fast, and it was Aldrich. And I know it was Aldrich because for the rest of his life he never once mentioned it, which is the most enormous act of discretion I have ever been the beneficiary of. The counting room smelled of cold ash and candle wax and him. The 9 sheets of the claim were still on the table where I had left them, and the ledgers were open, and Fenwick's pen was where he had dropped it. I put my head on the King of the North's chest and listened to a heartbeat and thought about the fact that there was no slate with my name on it anymore. And then I thought, with real alarm, I do not know what I am. For 211 days I had been a number on a wall. Before that, I had been a grain factor's daughter with a father. I had never in my life been a woman on a floor in the morning with nothing owed to anybody and nothing written down about her anywhere, and I lay there and discovered that this was the most frightening thing that had happened all year. Stop, he said into my hair. I am not doing anything. You are doing arithmetic. I can hear it. His arm came round. Whatever it is, say it. So I said it. I do not know what I am now. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, neither do I. That is not the worst position 2 people have ever been in. And then, after a while, there is a thing I have to do this afternoon, in the hall, in front of everybody. It is the last of it. And I would like you to be there. And I am going to ask you properly. And you are entirely free to say no. And I want to be clear that this is the first time in the history of the 2 of us that either of those things has been true. They filled the great hall at the 4th bell of the afternoon, because word had gone out that the king would speak, and after the morning they had had, Nobody in the north was going to miss it. 400 people. The same 400. The Westwater party had gone at noon with their banners rolled, but the northern houses stayed, all of them. And the lower tables were full of the house itself, the kitchen and the yard, and the stables, which is not customary, and which was done on his order. Bess was 3 rows back with her apron still on. Hannah was beside her. There were 11 women from the underhall standing where the underhall never stands. They put me at the front, not on the dais. At the front of the floor, which is worse, because you have the whole room behind you. He came in without the coat. I want to put that down because I do not think anyone else in that hall understood it. 9 years of a black coat with nothing on it. And he walked into his own hall in a plain shirt with his sleeves turned back, and the scar under his collarbone was not covered. And 200 northern lords saw a thing they had spent 19 years being told was a rumor. He did not go up to the high seat. He stopped on the floor, on the same level as everybody, and he stood there until the hall went quiet on its own. In the spring, he said, in the Hall of Accounts, in front of 400 of you, I bought a woman's debt, and I said that she cost me nothing. Nobody breathed. That was a lie. I want it corrected in the same room and at the same volume, because that is the only way a thing like that ever gets corrected. His voice was completely level. I paid 12,000 marks. I paid it to keep her out of the Westwater's hands. And I said the word nothing so that no one would bid against me. And it worked. And it was the cheapest and most cowardly sentence of my life, and I have carried the paper against my ribs every day since because I could not put it down. The hall had gone so quiet, I could hear the fire at the far end. Everyone in this house has been calling her the girl who cost the king nothing, for 211 days. I have heard it in this hall, and I have heard it in the yard, and I did not stop it, because stopping it would have cost her more than letting it stand. He looked around, unhurried, at all of them. It stops today. Any man in the north who wants to keep saying it may come and say it to me. He turned around and held out his hand, and I came and stood beside him, and I took it in front of 400 people, which was the first time either of us had touched the other where anyone could see. Then he reached into his shirt. He took out the contract. Folded in 4, furry at the creases, worn through at the corner, 6 years of a dead clerk's ink in the margin, and my name under a sum in a round clerk's hand. "This is the Crown's copy," he said, to the hall. The debt was discharged in the Hall of Accounts this morning at the first bell, in full, by the house's own claim. It is void. It has no force. It is a piece of paper. He unfolded it, all 4 squares, and held it up so that the whole room could see what it looked like. "I am not going to burn it," he said. "I want to be very exact about this. Burning it would be for me. It would be a good gesture, and I would feel better, and it would put the whole thing out of the room in 1 minute, and I have had quite enough of doing what is comfortable for me at her expense." And he put it in my hand. "It is hers," he said. "It always was. It is the only object in the north with her name and a price in the same line, and she is the one who gets to decide what happens to it, and she may decide that today, or in 10 years, or never, and no one in this hall will ever ask her about it again." Then the king of the north went down on 1 knee in front of his entire court, on the stone, with his sleeves turned back and the scar showing, and he did it looking straight up at me. "Mira, daughter of Halden," he said, "I am asking. You are free, and there is a horse in the yard, and the Southreach Road is open until the frost. And if you would rather have that, I will have you escorted to the border myself, and I will never say your name out loud again." His hand was shaking. I could see it. 400 people could see it. "Or you can stay, and be my wife, and hold the Northern Road with me, and I will spend the rest of my life being the second most sensible person in any room you are in." I looked down at him, and I thought quite clearly the way I think about everything. He is going to keep saying it in public. That is the price. This man is going to spend 30 years correcting himself out loud in front of witnesses, and there is no version of my life from here that is ever quiet again." "Yes," I said. The hall came apart. I have been told since that the noise carried down to the river. I would not know. I know that Bess was crying, and that Hannah was shouting, and that somewhere behind me 200 northern lords were on their feet, and that the king of the north stayed on his knee for a moment longer than he needed to with his forehead against my hand. We were married in the spring, when the grain came up the river at 6 marks the barge from the south reach, and 4,000 people on the east road ate. Aldrich stayed on as steward. I asked for it. He came to me the week after, and stood in the counting room doorway with his hands behind him and said, "I intend to submit my resignation." And I said, "I intend to refuse it, because you were right about every single thing you said to me, and you said all of it to my face and never once behind my back, and that is the rarest thing in this castle." He looked at the floor for a while. Then he said, "The books are still a disaster." And I said, "I know, sit down." And that was the entire conversation. The slate came down. Not the room, the slate, off the wall, and there is nothing hanging there now. There has not been a bound service in the Ashfell since that autumn. It was not a proclamation, and it was not noble. It was 2 lines in the 4th clause, and a woman who read the whole paper before she signed it, and any bound servant in the north may now discharge against any debt owed to the house that holds them, and 11 houses have had to open their books because of it, and I am told Lord Corvin of the Westwater has aged considerably. The contract is in a box in the counting room. I have not decided. It has been 4 years. Sometimes I take it out and unfold it, all 4 squares, and read the small, hard, forward-leaning hand in the margin that says, "Not for the year." And then I fold it back up the way my father folded a bill of lading, 4 corners, pressing each crease with my thumb, and put it away. It says 1,100 marks. It says 1 year. It is wrong about both, and I am the only person alive who has the figures. He tells it at every feast, every single one. Some visiting lord asks how the king of the north came to marry a grain factor's daughter, and he puts his cup down and says, "I bought her at auction and told 400 people she was worth nothing." And the whole table goes rigid, and he lets it sit there for exactly as long as it takes to be unbearable. And then he says, "It was the largest sum this house has ever paid for anything, and I would do it again tomorrow, and she has the paper." And the whole court hears him.